What? Doesn't need trying not to risk you.
Ready to go. Council laws is on.
Okay, welcome everybody to our meeting of the Regional Leadership Committee, May 2023. Before we progress any further, I will, unless anybody else volunteers, I will do the karakia to open this meeting. Tuia ki ranga, tuia ki raro, tuia ki waho, tuia ki roto, tuia ki te hiri, tangata, ka rongo te po, ka rongo te ao, hungie, huie, taiki. And the English version, to unite above, unite below, unite without, unite within, unite as one. Listen to the light, listen to the word of light. Now we can come together as one. Thank you. Right, apologies. I think, Liz, we've got apologies certainly from Elliot, Councillor Ware.
Yes, sir.
And I think also from Councillor Metham, Tim. But it wouldn't surprise me if he zooms in at some point. And on Zoom, we've got Councillor Lawes.
That's right.
And everybody else is here, yeah? Okay, public forum at my
Can we get
understanding.
a motion to accept the apologies?
Okay, sorry. We've got a move of the motion to accept the apologies. I'll second it. I'll put the motion, those for. Aye, against, carried. Thank you. Public forum, my understanding there's no public forum, correct? Thank you. Confirmation of the agenda. We've got 4 agenda items. We'll take those as agreed. Declaration of interest. Are there any declaration of interest? If not, moving on, confirmation of the minutes. I've read the minutes, happy with the minutes. I'll move the minutes. Do we have a second? Okay, thank you. We'll confirm the minutes. Are those for? Aye, against, carried. Right. Well, firstly, welcome everybody. We've got Steve, Simon, Tammy, Alexandra, and Joe. Have I got all the names right?
You did, yeah.
Cool.
And in the right order.
And in the right order. Yeah, so far so good. Okay, I'm going to read what I see as the key bits of the first report, the regulatory activity update, and then I'll invite staff to complete any gaps. But the purpose of this report is update the committee on the activities of the regulatory group between the 1st of January of this year and the 31st of March. There's been a lot of work going on, team. Thank you. For example, in the year to date, there were 654 applications for consent processing compared to 453 in the previous year. All were on 2 timeframes, as well as those consent types. There was 126 resource consents for intensive winter grazing have been issued. So well done, team. Thank you. In the background, there's still the 27 application deemed permits being processed, not to be forgotten about. Thank you. An interesting other activity is the public inquiries team have been responding to requests for comments on applications that are seeking to use the fast track process. So that's a relatively new activity. In relation to monitoring and enforcement, the data, pages are flying around. The data and systems compliance teams created 6,516 performance monitoring returns against the target of 4,500 or 4,000. In the year to date, there was over 1,000 site audits and inspections completed. Year to date, there were 791 site consent audits have been completed. And this is all important work, so that's good. In terms of fundamentals, dairy inspections, 185 completed. Overall compliance was high, with 118 farms graded fully compliant and 55 farms graded low risk non-compliance. 7 farms were graded moderately non-compliant and 5 farms were graded significant non-compliant. Thank you for that information, that's important. The same with forestry. In the year to date, OSC received 122 forestry notifications, 64 management plans completed, 29 on-site forestry inspections. Overall compliance is good, with 21 forestry sites graded fully compliant and 4 forestry sites graded low risk non-compliance. 3 forestry sites were graded moderate non-compliance due to 2 sites planted with setbacks and 1 forestry site with limited sediment controls. And finally, just as an enforcement sort of wrap up, in the year to date, the ORC has issued 105 formal enforcement actions compared with 90 in the previous period. ORC has issued 7 warnings, 55 infringement notices, 40 abatement notices. The most common causes of enforcement action related to water pollution and consent non-compliance. So it's busy out there. Thank you for your work, staff. I also noticed, Steve, in terms of harbour work, there were no significant incidents in this last period. Staff, what have I missed? Is there any general comments? Joe, anybody?
No, nothing further to add to that, just that it has been a very busy period for the team, but some really great results there.
Yes.
Yeah. So just happy to take it as read and we can answer any questions.
Cool. So I'll open it up. Okay.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. I was very pleased that you've got your hand up.
Look, you're talking about a significant number of work on public inquiries, and I'm just trying to complete, I think it's on page 9 of 50, and I'm just trying to compare that to what we budget for that as general rates. Like, now, that's an absolute key function of our council, and just checking where we are on costs for that, because that's a function that we don't charge for. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. So that is a portion that's rate funded, and we've budgeted for 2 FTEs plus some additional wider team time on that, and that budget is looking okay at the moment, but it is a very important service that we have there.
Yeah, but it's important because our cost structures and the balance is charged for.
Yes.
So what percentage, I was actually just trying to remember that and refer to the long-term plan. There's a percentage in your department that's...
So as a whole, the consents team needs to be 60% cost recoverable in terms of all of those FTEs, but we have the 2 FTEs that are in public inquiries. They don't have a chargeable time requirement. Their positions are fully funded and non-cost recoverable.
Yeah, it's just interesting we don't report against those.
So my understanding is that financial stuff goes through the financial.
Okay, then that's where, yeah, of course it does. Yeah, it's an interesting measure because we have to compare it to the actual workload. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Michael, I understand you have your hand up. I can't see it, but I understand it.
Good. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Cool. I've got 2 questions. The first is relationship to infringements, abatements and warnings. They are on sections 31 and on sections 42 and 43 of this report. Going to section 31 first of all, just take me through this. If I've got an infringement notice, you are fining me, correct? For something that I haven't done. If you give me an abatement notice, you are telling me to sort something out because I'm not doing it. And if you're giving me a warning, I'm not quite sure what that is, but I think it's 1 down on an abatement notice. Have I got these things right?
Yes, generally you're correct. So a warning is issued in lieu of an infringement notice generally. Infringement notices are issued where there has been non-compliance identified, and an abatement notice is the notice that requires someone to do something or to stop doing something. And all of the actions that we take are in accordance with our RMA compliance and enforcement policy, which provides a bit more detail on those enforcement tools.
So could I get an infringement notice and an abatement notice at the same time, or be one or the other?
Yes, you can. In some cases, it's appropriate to take multiple enforcement actions. So it might be that there's been a breach, so there's an infringement that's consistent with other enforcement decisions that we made, and then we want them to stop that breach. So an abatement notice might be issued as well.
Okay, so if I've got an infringement notice, I've done something wrong, I've had a financial penalty imposed upon me, yeah?
Yes, there are infringement fees. Yes.
Right. And right, my problem with that is that in a lot of other councils, including the one that I chaired, we used to put what the infringement notices were for and who they got them. Why don't we do that here?
Yeah, maybe, Michael. So we haven't done that since I've been here. We've always reported on the number of actions taken, but we haven't reported on the specific cases and the specific individuals involved in those cases. So it's not something that we've done as a matter of practice through our regulatory reports. We report overall on compliance and compliance activity, or enforcement activity in this case, but we don't go down to granularity of listing out all of the penalties or enforcement actions that we take.
Yes, well, I think we should. If you've broken the law or your consent to the stage where you have an infringement notice put against you, which is you are found guilty and you are receiving a financial penalty, and you are doing this anonymously, this is not only justice not being done, well, maybe the justice is being done, but it's not being seen to be done, is it? So I'm struggling to see why you wouldn't publish the consequences of fining people for what is clearly illegal or a regulatory activity when they have transgressed not only their consent, but they've transgressed their consent to the point they have intervened, and found them guilty and fined them. And I would have thought that if you've gone that far, then the publication of why you've done what you've done is an added disincentive to continuing that kind of behaviour or activity. Yeah?
Yep. Yeah, look, I don't disagree. Can we take that away and have a look at what some other regional councils are doing and bring that back to a future?
I'm not particularly interested in what other regional councillors are doing. I think if you're going to, I'm interested in, so I'm not interested. I'm interested in us doing this. I know that we used to do it when I was mayor. And because of that, it was an added disincentive. On section 42, you've also issued 55 infringement notices over the last financial year. The most common causes of enforcement action relating to water pollution, 30 of them, and consent non-compliance. Now, one of the things I want to know is, have you got some habitual offenders? 1. 2, what kind of water offences? 3, how serious are they enough to incur an infringement notice? And 4, are there particular areas of the region in which there is obviously a problem for you to be able to be putting 30 for water pollution? Now, those are reasonable questions to ask, but unfortunately, this doesn't give me a flavour, the way it's presented, as to what the problems are, the scope of them, whether or not we have habitual offenders, and whether or not we need to be much more direct after we find people guilty of offending against the regional plan on this sort of basis.
I think, Michael, my view is you've raised 2 good points, and I think what Richard's saying is they need to be reflected on. Is that fair, Richard?
Yeah, and I think that's a good discussion for us to have at a co-chairs meeting prior to the next regional leadership committee, before we start pulling this paper, and if we choose to do some subsequent papers together. So we'll put that on the agenda for one of the co-chairs catch-ups that we have.
Yeah, of which you should be attending, Michael.
Well, all I can say is that's a nonsense. I don't want to, it shouldn't go to a co-chairs meeting. There should be a direction that we want a policy paper on this for the next meeting. Why would you put it to a co-chairs meeting? That seems ludicrous to me. I've raised the issue. I don't believe that once it gets to the infringement notices are sufficiently tough to send the message. And I want a breakdown as to the questions I've asked. Now, why does that go to a co-chairs meeting? Why doesn't that come back, Mr. Chairman, to the next meeting of this particular committee?
I think it would go to that meeting so that discussion between the co-chairs and the CE and staff, and it may assist in framing up a report as you suggest or not. Any comment, Richard?
Yeah, that's
Yeah. So as I said before, Michael, you've raised two, valid points, and Richard's taken that on board.
Well, can I say, Chairman?
No, unless you want to craft a motion to.
Well, I do. I mean, I do,
Well,
because,
well, stop the noise and craft a motion.
well, don't be so rude. I would like to craft a motion, which is what I was trying to do, which would suggest that we receive at the next meeting of this committee further detail on infringement notices that have been issued by the ORC over the last financial year, including whether the publication of those infringement notices should be a matter of policy.
Cool. Are we able to put that on the screen first?
Maybe we could do some questions in the meantime.
Yeah, I want to have that on the screen, and I want to know if there's a seconder, and then we'll for that motion, and then we'll carry on with discussion.
Because I'm asking, can we still continue the questions? Because this is debate on one particular issue. We're still on question time. I don't want to debate.
Okay, we'll park that. We'll come back to that, Michael.
Okay.
Just wanted some clarity, and it may be a question more for you, Richard. When these numbers are 55 infringement notices issued, are they the ones that have been paid, or are they the ones that have been issued and still up for contention? Because people are, I presume, innocent until proven guilty.
So the data here is the infringement notices have been issued, so not necessarily paid. And just some clarity in terms of are they guilty? That's an assessment only made by the court.
Yeah.
So the infringement notices that we have come across non-compliance, and we have information that has identified non-compliance with permitted activity or consent conditions, and the appropriate action has been to issue an infringement notice.
And that infringement notice is usually by way of is it a fine or is it a penalty? Because
It's an infringement fee.
Yeah. Which is different because it's not necessarily saying it's guilty.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, that can only be determined by the courts. There is a process with any enforcement action, formal enforcement action that we take, that who we issue that notice to has rights in terms of requesting additional information and going to court in terms of defending themselves.
Yeah. So and so the quantum of those fees, as they are, is about.
It ranges depending on the breach of the RMA. So it starts at $300 and up to $1,000.
And the cost to take that to court for both the ORC and for the person who may be asked to pay that fee would be substantially higher, potentially.
Yes.
And the reason I'm asking this is just to understand that if we were to decide that someone who paid it were made public, that may be seen as a reason that they may take an action that would incur more costs both for them and for the council.
Potentially.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
Just on the quantum of that fee, and I think there is representation made under the RMA to get some of those fees bumped up. I'm sure that's in process. But probably my question is, and realising that there will be name sensitivity to a particular time through any enforcement action, there probably is, would there be any issue in actually describing to us what those infringement notices have been issued for, and therefore us being able to get a trend of what's actually happening in the marketplace.
Yes, we can provide that information at a high level in terms of, so an infringement notice is an alleged breach of section 9 or section 15 of the RMA. So we can break that down in terms of the infringement notices and what they have been issued for. We can also, at a broad level, show information on the location of those infringement notices. So that could give some understanding of the geographical nature of the
Geographic and the type of thing.
and the type. Yes, without identifying the
So beyond.
the individuals that have been issued those notices.
Cool.
Yeah.
So happy to second that motion.
Yeah, sure. We'll get the words.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Kim. Gretchen.
Thank you. Just in noting the amount of, sorry, through the chair, proactive methods, I suppose, for ensuring that we have got compliance across the region. There's a whole range there, from better templates to working with individuals and groups, and awareness of newer regulations, and building up, knowledge and ability to be compliant. I was wondering whether there's any comments on the amount of time that it's taking to take that type of approach with our community. Just noting that, well, I have anyway, I'm sure others have been receiving feedback from some of our resource users in the community that they're really happy with the approach, but it's taking a lot of time for them. I'm sure it's taking a lot of time for our team. What does that mean for our workload?
Yeah, so there hasn't been an impact on the workload in terms of those numbers and targets and figures. We're well ahead of everything, which is awesome. It is time well spent investing in those relationships and those resources as well. I think it's really important to focus on those relationships because, we have had to have some conversations around new regulations, and you can't do that without those relationships being there. Time, as I've said, is budgeted for these non-cost recoverable but incredibly important activities, and we do just have those within our workload. But in terms of what that might look like in the future and moving forward, that's a LTP type of conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just following up on that one, I guess I'm referring to section 23 on page 9 in the report, which is about improving the public inquiry service. I mean, that is so, I commend you on those steps, because that's so important in making it easy for people to do the things we want. I was going to ask, the online consent application forms, when do you foresee those will be ready to go?
So we have already got a couple of forms online that are live, and then we're doing a soft launch with some at the moment, and then we've got 26 coming up in the next couple of months. So we're kind of gradually increasing them over time, and then gradually letting the public know that they're available.
Thank you, but that's all quite soon, actually.
Yes.
It's not
Yeah.
way in the future.
No, within the next few months they'll be all online.
Thanks.
Cool. If no further questions, we have hang on a minute. We have one recommended motion followed by a second by Councillor Laws. So Liz, if you could put that on the screen, we have a mover and we have, can I suggest a tentative seconder? We'll just get the words right.
Yeah, thank you.
Can you see that, Michael?
Thank you, Graham.
That the committee receive at its next meeting further detail of infringement notices issued by the OSC over the previous financial year, including whether publication of these notices should be a matter of policy. So you're happy with that, Michael?
Thank you.
Kevin?
Happy.
Okay. Any discussion in relation to that second motion? Ella?
Yes,
Okay.
I just wanting to clarify the intent of that. My understanding of the discussion we'd had was the paper would be coming to us so we can work out whether what level of detail should be reported, which seems to be the second part of that. I just guess questioning the first part, which is saying there should be further detail of infringement notices. I thought my understanding of the discussion was the paper would be working out what that detail would be. Was that clear or?
A response,
I understand you.
a response, Michael?
This is debate, that's not a.
The aim of this is, in fact, I'm sorry,
Do you wish to communicate?
do you wish me to answer the question?
Yes, please.
The aim is to find more detail, basically where, what, where, why, the 4 Ws. And I think the lady who's just spoken now, I'm sorry, who's given that report, and I can't see you on the screen properly, has correctly highlighted a breakdown of the infringement notices so that we know where are the problems, whether there are habitual offenders, what are the parts of the region in which we have the greatest number of problems to get to an infringement status. And remember, with the infringement status, you're absolutely right. Somebody would be able to appeal an infringement status, presumably to the court. But if we've issued an infringement notice, we believe they've done something wrong. And if they pay the fine, then they are accepting that they have done wrong.
So does that answer your question, Alan?
No, I don't think so. It
Yeah.
wasn't clarified for me exactly what we're after.
Yeah, so I think the key question is will some of these infringers be named, or is it the process that we're going to go through?
Yeah.
Richard?
Yeah, so I agree, Rhonda. So I think that that there is no issue in us completing a further detailed report on the 4 Ws that Michael just named. I do want to go away and talk to staff and take some advice around the who component of that report. And that is the bit I think that relates to the matter of policy. I think we can at the next meeting, without wanting to drag this out any further, actually provide that first part of that report, which gives a much better overview of the where, the when, and the why, and the what. And we will provide in that report a little bit more detail around the considerations that this council needs to have before we go down the path of who, because that could lead to some unintended consequences. So I think I'm comfortable with that. I think it sets the direction, and staff will be clear of what Michael's expecting, or the council is expecting if it passes. And we can work with that for the next committee meeting.
Cool, thank you. Kate?
Thank you, Richard.
And I'm reassured that you understand where this is going, but I'm, and this is not a question, so I don't want it debated or answered. My problem with this motion is that it's limited to infringement notices, and there are a number of steps in our enforcement that we should be very aware and try and have consistency. So to pick one of our matters out and just pick on that, I think is fraught. So had that been a wider look at our enforcement steps and how we report on that, that would be fine. But I will not be supporting this because it seems to be dealing with only one issue, which you can't take out of a whole policy and do alone. It also puts a lot of pressure, I think, focusing only on one of these matters to something that is maybe driven by costs rather than efficiency, especially if it's dealt with by an insurance company. Because this is what sometimes is covered, that you will get people paying a fee, which is not a fine and is not any admission of guilt, because it's just fundamentally the easiest step. So I won't be supporting focusing just on infringement notices.
So Kate, you know, if the word infringement was replaced by enforcement notices, would that appease you?
I'm not debating.
I've asked you a question.
No, but that's not. I think that there's a whole lot of things wrong with it. I've just picked on one item.
You've just picked on one?
Yeah, I think it needs a much bigger conversation. But when I'm in debate, I don't necessarily think it's time to be questioned.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Michael.
I'd be happy to change the word from infringement to enforcement.
Yeah.
But also because that would pick up the abatement issue as well, Richard.
Yeah.
So what are we also issuing abatements over and about? So give us a bit more detail on that.
Oh, no, thank you, Michael. Kevin, are you happy about that?
Happy to add.
Cool. I think was your hand, hang on, who was next? Alexa.
I was just a bit worried about the word detail, actually. I was thinking it's analysis that we really want. I don't know the details of people's enforcement notices, and I know you've kind of got the who out of there, but it seems to me that we want further analysis to know.
After saying that, we have had our CE saying he's comfortable.
Yeah, the conversation's moved on. It's a while
Is that
back, but I
okay?
had my hand up.
No, thanks, Alexa. Thank you. I didn't see your hand up, Gretchen, did I?
Yeah, no, it's just, it's a whole lot of conversation since then, and Gary was next, yeah.
Okay, so it's fine, Gary. Sorry, but I thought I'd seen that hand up.
I'm a bit lost, to be honest, because Richard has provided a very practical way forward and I think a good response on behalf of staff around this is a policy change, a policy direction. I get what Michael is trying to do. I'm totally opposed to what Michael is suggesting at this stage without having the policy discussion with a paper from staff. The reason I'm totally opposed to it is that we have an enforcement ability and we are here to improve the environment, work with our landowners, work with our consent holders, and not hang them out to dry when they might inadvertently make a mistake, be not quite caught up with changes in rules. So naming and shaming every public meeting to me will worsen the ORC's position rather than better it, and it will be not good for those people or our enforcement outcomes, in my opinion. So I totally support the direction our CE suggested, and if that is the intent of the motion, then I'll support it.
Cool.
If the motion is still intending on including the who, then I won't be supporting it.
Yeah, so I think you've said quite clearly that we know who in the outcome of this motion.
That's right.
Is that?
And thank you. I'll support
Yeah, no, and it's interesting sort of comparing that with, the next report where the TAs are named. So like we're sort of getting into that realm there. Did I see another hand in there? Gretchen.
Yeah, I guess reflecting on what everyone else has said and the fact that Ms. Saunders has said that we're comfortable with providing that level of detail, whether that was through a broader conversation, which I thought was a really good way forward myself, because it could bring in a depth of issues that's broader than this potentially, but also really support what Councillor Kelleher has said. If you are looking at a psychology of change, I suppose, we are aiming at getting change in our community, and we're exactly, if naming somebody for traffic, and there's a range of different things out there that people can get wrong. If you had printed in the newspaper that you were going 62 kilometres an hour and named and shamed, that can be a bit harsh, versus actually once you get to a court of law, you are going to get named probably, and that's fair. So we're aiming at getting good outcomes here, and most of this paper, as we've mentioned already, is around the work that we do to ensure that that happens, and focusing on a small part of compliance is not what our strategy actually is mainly focused on as a council either. Hey, I'll support this is good, let's have the conversation, but I think it's a much broader issue of getting good compliance.
Okay, no, well said, Gretchen, and I think that'll all come out potentially in the report. Is that fair, Richard? That'll be one of the things considered. Anyway, I'm going to put the motion that we've got two recommended motions. One, firstly, is noting the quarterly report, and the second one, as per what's up on the screen there. Is any objections to taking them together? If not,
Quite separate, I thought.
okay, well, let's take the first motion that we note the quarterly report. Do we have a mover? I'll move that. We've got a second. Alan's seconding that. I'll put that motion. Those for, aye, against, carried. Okay, the second motion, as written there, has been moved by Councillor Laws, seconded by Councillor Malcolm. I'll put that motion. Those for, aye, against, carried. Thank you. Let's move to the second report. Thank you, everybody. I hope you're not all leaving. Okay, so this is the TA wastewater treatment plant compliance report. It's been prepared by Tammy and Rachel and endorsed by Joanna. The purpose of this report is to provide the committee with a summary of the compliance of the TA wastewater treatment plants and actions that have taken to achieve compliance. The key points that I take from this report is firstly, paragraph 3, the OLC compliance team monitors compliance on 31 wastewater treatment plants operating under 56 discharge consents by TLAs within the Otago region. Going down to paragraph 10, this table 2 and graph 1 provide information on the most recent consent audit report grading for each wastewater treatment discharge consent. And I've got to say that some of these numbers, in my view, are disappointing. They then lead to paragraph 15, where table 3 talks about the infringement notice and the abatement notices by the wastewater treatment. There were 11 infringement notices and 19 current abatement notices. Just going back to the compliance report, paragraph 10. So we have 11 consents on full compliance, 15 on low risk non-compliance, 13 on moderate non-compliance, and significant non-compliance 17. So in terms of the consents, approximately a fifth or 20% of our consents are full compliance. If you look at the moderate non-compliance and the significant non-compliance, if you group them together, you could say that approximately half of the consents are simply that moderate non-compliance and significant non-compliance, which is, in my view, very concerning. After saying that, we have all been tabled with this graph here. And what this graph says is that there's some light at the end of the tunnel, and that if we compare the compliance in 2020 and 2021 and 2023, for those on Zoom, I'm not sure if you'll have this graph, but you'll see that, for example, the green bars are progressively going up. Full compliance in 2020, full compliance was down at 14%, 2021 was then 15%, and 2023, 20%. I don't think we're able to strictly compare these numbers because the timeframes, Joe, are dissimilar, but nevertheless, it's showing a glimpse of optimism, because on the face of it, there's some disappointing numbers there. I'm going to open it up. I see Councillor Laws has his hand in the, oh, sorry, staff. Is there any comment by staff or Richard? Apologies, Tammy.
I'd just add that the monitoring of wastewater treatment plant discharge consents is a high priority for us in the compliance team, given the environmental risk associated with that activity. I'd also note that we have proactive engagement with all of the TAs in monitoring their consents, and they're all engaged in the process, which is really positive. And would just caveat that the paper that I've tabled here, it can't be a direct comparison, but it does give an indication that there is, while there is still a range of significant and moderate non-compliance, that there is progression being made towards achieving compliance across the wastewater treatment plants across the Otago region.
After saying that, Tammy, it must be a slow path, because, I mean, if you extrapolated it out how long it would take for everybody to have full compliance, then that would be a long period of time. Or is that an unreasonable expectation?
I think the nature of the wastewater treatment plants is there's time to improve compliance in terms of if any infrastructure upgrades are required, in terms of installing the new upgrades, and also a number of the consents have what we call percentile discharge quality conditions, which means it's an average over a year. So it will take time to achieve compliance if you've had poor compliance previously. So it does take time to improve compliance, but I think it's positive to see that the direction is towards improving compliance across.
Thank you. Any comment, Richard?
No, I think Tammy summarised that really well. I think what we also look for is, even though this breaks it down by the 4 compliance grades, there is a significant scale even within the significant non-compliance. So what we can see is plants that are making improvement and councils that are investing and are on the right path. And that's why our team work closely with our TLA, Otago TLAs, because we just want to ensure that there is a plan and they are making progress. And so even though they may still be significant, they could be a lot better than they were previously.
Yeah.
But it will take a long time. And it is, what we do know, and what I've certainly learned over the last 3 years, is that the capital of investment required and the planning and everything that goes into managing these does mean it can take time to see significant shifts in the overall grades. What we are interested in, as well as holding them to account, is really working to ensure that they have those plans in place and that they are funding these upgrades.
Cool. So there's a storyline behind the numbers. Yeah. Okay, so I've got 2 hands in there. Michael Laws has had his hand right from go, followed by Kate. Michael?
First of all, I just want to compliment staff. This is exactly what we asked for 3 or 4 years ago. And I think you're doing an excellent job. I like the way you've presented this report. And ironically, apropos our previous discussion, this is naming and shaming. This is holding territorial authorities to account for decisions that they have or have not made. And I have very little doubt that the Otago Regional Council monitoring team, Tammy, under you and your team, are critical in ensuring compliance around these issues and improving the quality of wastewater management in our region. So first of all, a very public thank you and well done. The second question I've got for Tammy, though, is this, and her team. The Clutha District Council is, well, according to these figures, almost the delinquent offender, but they've addressed that recently by firing their contractor CityCare and by, they hope, finding some sort of solution to long-term maintenance of their wastewater. But there are Central Otago's not much better. Queenstown Lakes, they've got problems as well. When you say we work with these people, are you setting expectations and guidelines for them, Tammy, to reach by certain days? We expect you to be there, or is it you step in after they alert you that they've got a problem?
You okay about answering this question, Tammy, or yeah?
Yeah. So yes, there's a range of actions that our team takes when working with TAs and any consent holder. So once audits are undertaken, there's some corrective actions identified in those audit reports. For the sites that have abatement notices, there's a clear deadline for which compliance must be met within those abatement notices. And we have, I guess, more informal correspondence, understanding what plans they have in place and to address the compliance issues. As Richard mentioned, there is a long planning timeframe, funding timeframe for those. So it can range, but we are regularly in contact with each of the district councils in terms of how are they going to achieve compliance.
Cool.
I'll just add in one thing to that. I think since we made this a priority in the compliance work program and have had those conversations with TLAs, we're finding a much higher level of self-reporting, which is a really positive reflection on their processes and their, what they will report proactively when there are issues, rather than us finding it, either through a public complaint or down the track, which means that we can step in earlier and assess it and take action if necessary, but also ensure that the process is being put in place for them to fix it. So that relationship work by Tammy and the team, and the response, the positive response we've had from the TLAs has been a positive as well.
Cool. You happy, Michael? Yep.
Very.
Kate.
I'm going to go off tangent. This is great. Do we do one on stormwater? I can't see it in the forward planner as well.
No, we haven't done one to date on stormwater, mainly because a lot of those fall under our permitted activity rules in our water plan.
Okay. What do we? What these are self-monitored, I think, generally. One of the big factors in wastewater systems not working particularly well is people using that system for the wrong products, and certainly within, and it blocks up systems from working, and the plastic wipes and things that people for some reason think are disposable down that system is awful. We don't have any rules that stop that sort of stuff going in. That would be done by TA.
It is, yeah.
Do we test? What do we test for, or require them to test for in monitoring? And I'm going to go down a rabbit hole of plastics, because we don't. Do we test for those?
It depends on the consent conditions that are added to that specific location. So depending on what type of plant is being run and where it is located and what we are concerned about, then there'll be different monitoring on that. So it'll, whilst there's a degree of consistency about we monitor and look for, it will depend on the specifics of that consent and that plant.
And last question, if I may.
Yeah.
We find something's not working, and generally these things are meant to work in order to make the environment and people safe. What steps do we take when we know that there are breaches to ensure that the community or the environment effects are minimised? Is it our role to notify people, or do we leave it to the TAs to do that? And what steps do we need to take?
Yeah, so that's led by the TA responsible. So they notified Public Health or Te Whatu Ora, Taumata Arawai if required, and also iwi, Okaha and Temi. They do those notifications. It's something that we request, that they have made those appropriate notifications, but the responsibility is on them. And if they aren't making that notification, then we will step in.
It also includes public signage in the specific areas, depending on where the issue is, to make it public aware.
Right, sorry, I lied. I have one more question from your answer. Sorry. Who covers? There's a huge amount of work from you guys doing this. Who covers that cost of that time because of this? Is that chargeable?
Yes.
And it is recovered in full?
Site inspections and audits are recovered in full. The assessment of performance monitoring information, so management reports and data being submitted, is recovered at 75% of actual costs under our policy.
Thank you. Andrew.
Gary was actually before me, but I'm happy to go after Gary.
No, you go.
Okay.
I didn't even see Gary's hand. Yeah.
Looking that way the whole time.
Yeah. Throw something in here.
Looking to the right too often there, Gary. We had a report in our called Air Freshwater 2023. It was an MFE report that looked at nationwide issues with fresh water. And there's a stat in that report that talks about, I think it's 47% or late 40% of all wastewater discharges in New Zealand are discharged to either streams or lakes. So my question was around, most of these discharges are for a relatively long period of time, 30, 35 years. Have we got any data around what life is left in those discharges to waterways from wastewater treatment plants in Otago, just to get a bit of a handle? And I appreciate the upgrades that have occurred, particularly in more recent years, where they've gone to a tertiary treatment, which literally you could probably drink the water that comes out the end of the pipe. But have we got any idea of
when it's
the
compliant
balance of those, the life of those wastewater treatment plant discharge consents, to get a bit of a handle on how they get to fall due in years to come?
We do have that data in terms of the expiry of the discharge consents, and we can provide that.
My question was around, do they all, there's going to be 20 or 30 that fall due in the next 10 years, for example, or just scattered over the next 30-year period? That was sort of my question. But
We have had some ones come in for their replacement consents. So they will be off, and then we are dealing with them rolling in over the next 10 to 15 years. Some of the ones we have done recently have had short-term consents, about 6 years, rather than what you may have seen in the past, from 10 years ago, as those 35-year consents as a matter of course. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. Gary?
Yeah, I'm a bit stunned by this. I mean, the incremental steps to improve are so small. I suppose my question is, what has changed from the issuing point of these consents in the infrastructure? Because you assume that when these consents were issued, that these operations were fully compliant. So something must have changed in that time period that then means that we have such a level of non-compliance now that looks to be, like, is it even achievable that many of these consents would ever be compliant?
So probably a couple of assumptions there. I wouldn't assume that plants are compliant from day one. So we undertake an assessment through the consent process and will grant a consent. And obviously we want to have absolute confidence that what we are consenting will achieve the parameters set out within the conditions, but we can't guarantee that. So I would say that sometimes we fall into a position where they're non-compliant straight away because it doesn't operate as the experts have designed it, and then there's some follow-up work that needs to occur to address whatever issues they've found after they have constructed. There are some plants that will not comply with the current consents, and those councils will need to go away and think about what the infrastructure upgrades required might be in order to achieve compliance in the future, because it would be, there would be significant capital investment required. So look, you're right in that they are very incremental, and it does show that there is a lot more work required right across the board for wastewater treatment plants to comply with the environmental levels that we're setting through the conditions of consent now. But I guess my position on that is that we won't see a wholesale change in a short period of time. We are going to need to continue to ensure that the investment's being applied and the right designs being applied to just continue to see improvement. But it's not going to be a case of wholesale changes in compliance.
So we won't be returning to all green at a point in the future. Thank you.
And thank you, Gary. And, just following on from that, Tim and Joe, so some of these plants have, long-term consents, but do the standards within those consents change? Have the standards been increasing over time that these consents have to address?
So depending on when the consent application has come in, we've had the national policy statement for freshwater and a few other changes around the legislation that we have to consider when we are looking at these. But once a consent's granted, those conditions are there, and those are the conditions that those parties have to comply with.
Okay.
Can I just make one more point too? And Tammy mentioned it before, and I think it is worth just remembering, and is that there may be an issue at a particular plant during a year. They might have an electrical fault or something that occurs during the year that tips them into non-compliance, and then it can then take a number of months for those rolling averages that Tammy talked about to push them back into a compliant state overall. So this might not be a reflection. In some cases, it is a reflection that actually the standard's not high enough and we need improvement. In some cases, it can be that there has been an issue, and that will be reflected for a period of time in their rolling averages. But actually, on the whole, the plant is operating well. So there are some sort of differences in the numbers that are here. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you, Richard. It's time. Tim Clark, Lloyd.
Yeah, thank you. It's an awesome report, as was the previous report. My question is just around the significant non-compliance, because I was reading it all. I've written in here, these are bad on the graph because I like graphs. But what I'd like to know is how many of these significant non-compliances from actual events that relates in pollution getting in the streets, and how many are just paper-based significant non-compliance?
We don't break it down like that. So significant non-compliance in terms of if there's been a breach in terms of wastewater quality discharge, significant non-compliance. It can also be considered significant non-compliance if we don't receive data, because we don't know whether or not they're complying or not. So whilst it might be considered a more technical non-compliance, it can still be considered significant. We can look at the breakdown between those, but that would take some time for staff to work through what was the driver of the significant non-compliance for each audit report.
Yeah, and so and if there's like a report not received or data not received, it takes like 12 months before it goes from red to green. Is that correct?
Potentially, yeah. There's a range of factors that we consider depending on what type of report that is.
So what it's, because even though the reds are looking pretty bad, that's not just like saying 60% of it's all going to, going into pollution or discharge. There's probably a significant portion is a lack of paperwork being done in a timely fashion.
Potentially.
Yeah. And it's that, my only other comment is we seem to be, like, I think we need to get our heads around, that paperwork sort of stuff, and this is probably from where I come from. But we got to be careful that we don't just, as we go forward, just accept that people are going to be non-compliant forever. I think we actually need to put some lines in the sand and say, we actually, you guys are actually part of the general public as well, and you have to have an action plan to become compliant rather than just saying, it's all very well saying they're going to need a new plant. They actually need to have a plan of what they're going to build wind to upskill their stuff. Yeah. So I think we just need to be really careful we don't become complacent and that, TLAs aren't up to where we expect them to be. We should be putting some pressure on them to move on, to get better.
Thank you, Lloyd. I think they were good words. Just in your question regarding, paper versus actual pollution or paper processing issues close to pollution. I think it's fair. I just did a quick skim, like all the councils, I think I'm right in that, Tammy can tell me I'm wrong, have actually had non-compliance with consent conditions due to exceedances in wastewater quality limits, so pollution. So, for example, paragraph 19, Kruger District Council, Central Otago District Council, paragraph 23, exceedances in discharge quality limits. Dunedin City Council, paragraph 31, abatement notices because of non-compliant discharge quality limits from the Warrington and Waikouiti wastewater treatment plants. I didn't have time to skim the Queenstown one, but here we go here. Paragraph 36, Hawea, abatements notice due to discharge quality exceedance. So, yes, there are paper processing issues and information issues, but there are water quality pollution issues and significant ones. Alexa.
I'm also wondering, a lot of this is stormwater overflow in some of these places like Ormako and others, and we've got to get to a point where stormwater overflow cannot do anything to our sewage systems, and I just don't know how we're getting there.
So yeah, look, that's an issue for the manager of the network, which is the TLA. So if they have stormwater infiltration issues that are leading to non-compliance, then that's a matter for them. And I know there is significant investment in terms of getting that separation, so there isn't that infiltration. Because you're right, that does put pressure on networks. If every time there's heavy rain, they're essentially overloading the wastewater system, but it's not something that ORC has the ability to influence, because again, it's management of the network.
Yeah, I'm not. Is that actually correct, Richard? This is a question, and it was a question I asked recently, for example, about the Cochrane Stream, that the DCC has a consent that includes that overflow provision for a certain amount of time. And actually, it's the ORC that goes into bat to say that when they apply for that consent, no, that consent time period needs to be shorter. And my understanding, in fact, that's exactly what happened, so that the ORC does have a key role to play.
So we have a regulatory role,
yeah,
which you're right, and the way you described it is right, but we don't have a direct role in decisions around the investment and work undertaken on a TLA system.
No, that's true. But
we have a regulatory role which influences the decisions that they make.
Yeah, but basically, for example, the Cochrane Stream overflow situation, for example, we give them 6 years. They have to determine how they're going to, address the matter, but it's our role to make sure that they actually achieve that by that time frame. Correct?
It's our role to ensure that they don't breach the consent that's issued.
Yeah.
So again, I know it's semantics, but we've got to be clear. It's not our decision to make in terms of what they do next. Our role is to ensure that whatever consent we grant is complied with. And if they get to the end of 6 years and that consent expires, then we would be enforcing whatever the relevant rules are for that area of the city or region. Again, it's not that decision, whether it's taken by us or an independent commissioner, doesn't directly, that's not us making a decision for them. That's the difference in what we're talking about.
No, that's fine. Thank you. I've got Michael and then Kevin.
Listen, that's a really important point you've made, Richard. It's an important legal nicety that you're saying that we've got a regulatory role, which is basically we're there if they breach their consent, yeah? So we're not there in any other capacity. It's when they do something wrong or after we've audited or monitored them that we then may play a role. But I thought Lloyd made a really, really good point when he says, at what point do we expect compliance to be a reasonable expectation? I guess, Richard, I'm trying to marry those two and wondering if there's a gap. I want to get to pathway to full compliance as quickly as possible. I'm sure everybody around the table does. If you look at the detail in this report of each of the wastewater treatment plants, you can't guarantee that looking at this. Have a good look at Cromwell, for example, and Roxburgh as just two examples chosen at random. At what point have we got a gap in between expecting you will get there by this day if you are non-compliant now, or, Richard, the point you've raised, we can only intervene once there is a breach of the consent. But surely once there's a breach of the consent, Richard, we have a right to step in and say, you show us your pathway to compliance and full compliance of the consent. Or are we missing that bit?
No, what you've described, and Tammy can jump in here, but what you've described is the process, and that will often be the abatement notice process, where that requires them under a legal notice to comply with the conditions of their resource consent. And that means they've got to go through that process of demonstrating to our staff what steps they're taking to get to compliance. So that process happens. There is no acceptance that it might be non-compliant. Our position is that every consent should be complied with.
Yeah, but I'm just looking at Cromwell, for example. It's just an example. They haven't been compliant since basically 2021, according to this report. We're now almost halfway through 2023. I guess I'm asking, at what point do we pull the trigger? I think 2 years is too long, Richard, just looking at that, particularly for something that was built relatively recently. There shouldn't be any exceedances. There shouldn't be any discharges of pollution into our waterways, but there still are. At what point do we say not good enough?
Tammy, my position, you jump in, is that we would, any non-compliance we note would be our compliance and enforcement policy would inform the action we take. So if it is considered significant enough, then we might, as you've said, pull the trigger, and that might, in terms of a description of whatever that action might be, and there's a range of actions. So the fact they've had that in place for multiple years, and I don't have the details of Cromwell in front of me to understand what the severity of that non-compliance was over that time, but the team would be looking at everything and comparing that against our policy and taking the appropriate action, which would range from either a warning through to infringement through to prosecution. And that's the way that it's applied consistently.
It's not working though, is it? I mean, is there a gap? That's the reason I've asked this question. It's not a criticism. It's just but it's still carrying on. You see, a lot of them are going through LTPs at the moment. Obviously, there's the Three Waters issue and that uncertainty and anxiety as well. and they're asking themselves questions about investments in their infrastructure. And it's been made obviously no clearer by the events of the last declarations of the last month. In the meantime, we're here charged with making sure there is no pollution exceedances going into any of our waterways. Have you flagged treatment plants? Omakau would be a good example. Have you flagged treatment plants where you expect there to be ongoing problems?
I won't answer that question specifically, but I guess in terms of our approach where there are abatement notices, so Cromwell Wastewater Treatment Plant has had an abatement notice on the consent since 2021. So we receive regular updates from CODC in terms of the actions that they're taking and some of the upgrades that they have put into that plant. And for some, and I don't know for that one with certainty, but with some we extend the compliance date to align with that investment. And I guess I can give some assurance to this committee that across many of these abatement notices, if we were to report in a year from now, the direction that some of the councils are going in, we would have cancelled those abatement notices because they would have met compliance both with the abatement notice and their conditions of their consent. So I appreciate it is a long process, but I think the direction is in the right direction in terms of there is a progression towards achieving compliance, which is really good to see, given the nature of these treatment plants and what's required to get to compliance. But absolutely our expectation is that compliance is met, and that is something that we communicate regularly with all consent holders, including the TAs.
Yeah, and I would say where there is a plant that we have significant concerns about, and Omakau's been talked about publicly by CODC, you know, we do have conversations with them when there are those concerns. And I know that, for example, that one, there is a business case being done at the moment to consolidate Alexandra and Omakau into a plant, and that's in the early phases. So we'll be interested to see how that carries on, because that is one site that we all know, based on its location, is going to continue to be challenging. So we are involved in that sense. The wastewater space, and it's not just wastewater, it's free water space, and you've flagged it as a really challenging space at the moment. However, our position on that's been very clear right through with the TLAs, that regardless of what's happening, they still have an obligation until whatever new entity and whatever that looks like takes over these consents, that they are responsible for those consents and for ensuring compliance. So we've been very clear in that position.
Thank you, Michael. Some good questions, and I really appreciated the response from Richard and Tammy, particularly, you know, the three waters, because it's a huge issue, the current situation and any transition. Yeah, no, thank you. I've got Kate. I've been liberal and let Kate speak a number of times.
It's a questions. And look, I really enjoyed where Michael was taking this. Is that my concern is that we, and as Andrew pointed out, we have very long terms sometimes of these consents. That if I was comparing this to where we're going with land and water plan and understanding what GMP plus may be, or plus, how many of our consents that may be complying at the moment, but if they were issued tomorrow, would have very different conditions, which may put them into that red spot? I mean, you must see.
Yeah, it's not really something that we can comment on, because I mean, in terms of what that future state application and future planning state may look like, you know, we've got the consents as they are now, and that's our focus for compliance.
So when we look at investment by TAs and where they're going, the problem is that taking them on that journey, I mean, are they really aware that there may be some compliance to monitor water discharge from some of these schemes, if they're 30-year consents, probably aren't?
So they engage with us and our policy team and our consents team in the early business case stages to get a steer. So that's something they do as a matter of course.
Yeah. Cool, thank you. I'm looking at wrapping this up, but I've got Alexa, Gary and Kevin. Cool, Alexa.
Mine's just a really quick one. Is where in here do we see abatement notices for things like stormwater? Because I know there's some about.
Not in this report. This report is only around wastewater.
So where do we see?
Well, in the next report, where we write a breakdown of our infringements and abatements, courtesy of that previous resolution, you will see anything related to stormwater.
That will be in the last one.
There
Cool.
wasn't anything in there.
No, there wasn't, because we don't do it at the moment.
Okay.
Thank you, Gary.
I'm all good. I was just trying to get your neck to turn this way.
Kevin. Yeah.
This is a report, there will be a question, this is a report that will go to the paper that, probably doesn't paint that good a picture, but there's actually a lot of good actions happening. And I will make a weak plug for the WDC, which is the Waitaki District Council. And they did receive an abatement notice in March 2022 about ongoing exceedances. But it would appear from that they've taken the action, they've desludged a pond, and I assume now that those actions have resulted in a good result. And are you able to comment on that?
I can't comment on that one directly. I only to say that there is still an abatement notice in place.
Yep.
I can't comment directly as to whether they've achieved full compliance.
Right. So just on that process, and so an abatement, abatement notice will stick in place until the exceedances stop, or until your consent conditions are met.
So generally what will happen, particularly if it's around quality discharge conditions, and because there's those rolling averages, is that we issue an abatement notice which says you must cease the discharge unless you are compliant with quality discharge consent. And it's usually a long time frame to reasonably allow them to get under that limit. So it's usually around a year, but this one could be 2, depending on the consent condition. And so they've got a compliance date, and then they must comply from thereafter.
Yeah, in that, so Waitaki District Council's got 3. Then Palmerston is obviously doing some work as well, and they're looking at reviewing their consent conditions and whether that be extra land or whatever that. And Maoraki is they just haven't done the paperwork, so they need a real kick in the butt. But one thing is Omakau is we say that it's actually going to be challenging for quite some time. Well, actually, it's not challenging; it's polluting. It's actually polluting. And one thing that's come through is that we say that these district councils or TAs have got to sort out funding. Well, to me, that's the whole premise of Three Waters, is because TAs haven't put the investment in. So I just wonder why we actually use funding as a matrix, because all these territory authorities could write out a check tomorrow, because none of them are insolvent, could write out a check tomorrow and actually fix those problems. So I'm just really concerned. The ones that are doing the work, find a hiccup, move the problem on and getting things done. That's really, really good. But I really want to know who's not actually making the right efforts. And if they're using funding as an excuse, I need to be able to put in some method of putting pressure on them, because that's simply, funding is simply not an excuse. So how do we get to the bottom of that?
Oh, there was a question. Any
Right,
comment?
sorry about that.
No, look, it's there are processes. You're right. The decision ultimately sits with the TLA, and they need to consider the risks of not undertaking work that complies with whatever enforcement notices that the ORC might issue. That's the decision that they make, and our consideration is the length of time it would take to confirm funding, design, tender, undertake. There's a whole process in there for some of those upgrades. Some of them are short-term actions and they're undertaken as operations and maintenance. Some of them are long-term because they do require significant work. And that's the conversations that happen to ensure that our abatement notice reflects what an appropriate length of time would be to get that done.
Cool.
Sorry, can I just add in for fairness around the Ormaco wastewater treatment plant? It is currently fully compliant with the consent conditions. Yeah.
I think isn't one of their
It's 1,000
risk
cubic
issues
meters
their
as well,
location. So they're compliant, but if there's a flood, then there's a risk of non-compliance. Hello, I'm going to do Alan last, and then we'll wrap this up. Thank you.
Look, the information in this report is really shocking, actually, I think. I do have a question, and perhaps Tammy and Richard have already answered it, but I just wanted to pose it directly. And that is, can we reasonably take any action above what we're already doing to move things along faster?
Richard?
I think I would say that we are taking action, and the data shows that. So there are currently 19 current abatement notices in place, and we issued 10 infringement notices in the year to date. So we are taking action as far as I'm concerned.
Cool. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, everybody. Can I just say, a big thank you again to Richard, Joanna, and Tammy and your team. We're so reliant on your systems and processes, and I can see you have put the heat on these TAs and they need to up their game urgently. Thank you. So we have a recommendation, I think quite simply to note. So we've got mover and a second. So Lloyd's moving, Kevin seconding. I put the motion to note this report. Those for, against, carried. Thank you. Just a minute, stand up and stretch as we do the swap over.
Yeah, and we've got some positions on as well. Every time we pay something out, we can only on stakeholders. And we keep allowing the accounts as the infrastructure.
Okay, I'll call everybody to order. We all have a coffee stomp around and in a minute, I'll get to the right page. So I'll welcome Joe and
Vicky.
Vicky. Joe and Vicky. Thank you. Oh, so this report is a third report, community newsletter proposal, author Joe, endorsed by Richard. This report provides the committee with details proposal to introduce a new Otago ORC newsletter that we distribute to all Otago households and available digitally. The proposal is part of the Community Survey Action Plan, where that survey had highlighted that the public has a low awareness of the council's purpose and activities, and as part of the action plan, this was the introduction or potential introduction of this newsletter. Staff are recommending the committee endorse a trial of an ORC newsletter that's distributed into letterbox 3 or 4 times per year at a projected cost of $25,000 per issue. So I think that'll equate to something like 100,000. What have I missed out on, Joe? There's obviously a report, comprehensive report. Any comments from yourself or Vicky?
Yeah, we currently, we used to have a newsletter called Waterlines. We didn't think that was doing the job, quite frankly. We didn't think it was reaching enough of our audience across the region. We've noticed that a lot of TLAs have newsletters, printed newsletters that go into letterboxes. The Otago Regional Council, we're in a more slightly difficult position than some of our TLAs, in that our community is widespread across the whole region. So we have to work that little bit harder to get our information into to our constituents. And let's be fair, the media isn't what it used to be. The reporting doesn't always pick up on all of our stories that we would like the public to know about, and we think that's reflected in the community survey. So we think it's a great idea to be able to reach out to our audiences and tell them the news that we think they would like to know.
No, thank you. Just before I open it up, I just want to tease out that, your comment about the water lines. So the water lines only went to 12,000 letterboxes, whereas the audience for this is significantly more, isn't it? What type of numbers are we talking?
We're talking at around 90,000
Yeah.
letterboxes, which is almost reflects our rating database.
Yeah. And the Waterlines had a relatively narrow regulatory and water-related policy. So, you know, bigger audience, bigger scope.
It did, and we also have some very good staff to be able to write the new newsletter and produce it in-house and
In-house.
design it in-house.
Cool. I'm going to open it up. Thank you. Any comment from anybody, Alan?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think communicating better is a really important thing to do. I was just thinking, I had sitting on my dining table a copy of the Clutha Council, which was the fold-out one, and the little DCC one. And the person I was talking to commented that smaller format was much more accessible and less daunting. Was that part of your considerations?
Yes, it is. We're not wanting to overwhelm with our newsletter. We're looking at a 4-page A4 newsletter. So yeah, we did look at that, and often brevity is better than being too long-winded. So yeah, we concur with that approach.
Yeah, right. Yes, I guess I was just thinking that even that Clutha double A4 one was more daunting than the little DCC one. But if you've considered those other options, I'm happy.
With the cost involved, then we need to get the best bang for our buck. So yeah, we thought that 4-page A4 would not, because there's a set cost of delivery no matter what size between the small one and the A4 one. So we thought we'd use that opportunity to present more information.
Thanks.
Okay. I endorse what Alan was saying. I love the format of the DCC one. We've got Michael, and then we've got Kate. Michael.
As you know, this is a great passion of mine, communication of the ORC to our communities. I've got 3 questions. One relates to distribution. When we tried this last time, it was a disaster in certain parts of the region because of the distribution outlet that was used and utilised. So that's the first question. The second is...
Should we do that question, Michael?
Sure, okay.
Yep, so you're absolutely right, Michael. Last time we did a wide or a region-wide distribution of, and it was the long-term plan on that occasion, we were let down badly by the contractor involved. So there was a number of meetings subsequent around how, if we were in the future to use them, we would be able to monitor their delivery and successful delivery or not. We would need to go through a tender or quote process before confirming who the supplier would be. We are limited with suppliers in this space, which was part of the discussion we had around LTP. But if we were through that process to end up with a similar supplier, we would have a very robust quality control process in place with them to ensure that delivery was being made as we were contracting and paying for.
Cool.
Second question, I've only got 3, they're all quick. One of the things is the ability to contact your locally elected representative. Will our names, i.e. your local electoral representatives, be going on this newsletter with our communication details?
Yes, that's we're still looking at the content, but that's perfectly possible, and I think sounds like a great idea, to be honest.
Okay, and the third thing is, you put out each year, I think, still, I think by hand, or sorry, printed material, the rates demands. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
Yes, the rates go out, some by email now. There is a system, and Nick will correct me if I'm wrong, there is a system where you can request your rates by email, but predominantly they're still going out in hard copy. And this year, that hard copy will also include an information flyer, brochure, whatever you want to call it, with more information around what the ORC is doing with the rate take, which was another action that came out of the community survey last year.
That was exactly the question I was going to ask, Richard. It's a free entrance point into every letterbox, personally addressed. I just wanted to make sure we had a communication outlet or distribution in that particular rates demand.
Yep, we do as a separate piece of work to this, but it is on the action plan.
Brilliant.
Thanks,
Excellent.
Michael. Kate,
I really like this, and it's going a long way in direction. What I'm going to test, and it's don't take it as criticism, is that readership will increase if you are supplying the information those people want, not necessarily the stories we want them to read. And there's a fine line in understanding that difference. And I have to say, it doesn't matter where I go, people just want to know how their money's been spent. So it's an interesting question, Michael Richard answered to Michael's previous question. But how much of the forward planning work programs are we going to actually be able to tell the stories on? Because we haven't done that well in the past. And it's certainly something that I've heard in Balclutha and Whamahaka and Mosgiel and a whole lot of other places. Where are we getting to that space so that we can tell people what we're doing with their money?
Yeah, we are. So we are looking at this from an audience perspective rather than so much a council perspective. And it's a little bit of both, but primarily you wouldn't do something like this without knowing that your audience is going to be interested in what you're doing. So we'll be taking guidance on that from staff, and we're happy to hear
From
from councillors as well.
A connection into constituents of the community. So absolutely feedback in terms of the type of content that the community are interested in, we would welcome that. I mean, that's part of, I see as part of the role of governors in terms of the conversations you're having and the things people are interested in, and that feeds back through the team.
We're also taking a lead from the survey itself, which gives us a lot of information about what the communities are missing at the moment and what they're interested in. So we'll be looking to the survey as well as a guide.
thanks, Joe. Thanks, Kate. Any other questions? Kevin?
Probably just an observation, just on this vigil, and it's a concept only. One of the things that I get stormed with this sort of stuff in my rural letterbox. I just find that the branding that you've looked at here doesn't really tell me well enough that it's ORC. And I think that's critical, that if we're going to either save something or put it on our bench or wants other people to see it, that ORC is not, that needs to happen, but it is from ORC.
Yep.
Cool. That's in fact on our next report. That's one of the actions from our surveys is the ORC branding. Keep pushing that. Lloyd.
Yeah, the ideas.
No, thanks for feedback.
Sorry. Thank you, Lloyd.
Oh, yeah, I'd just like to say it's an awesome initiative, and I think at the end of the day, our communication with our people is the number one thing we've got to get right, because they're all part of the same equation. So any way that we can get closer to our communities, the better. And I do concur a little bit with Kevin that they need to know, it needs to be bright and know that it's ours, and we need to have stories that the people want to be reading. So, and as soon as you do that, it's what they want to read, so that they feel part of it rather than what we want them to read. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because then you can tell the other story way better because they're engaged. So at the end of the day, I think at the end of the day, it's a pillar of what we need to be doing.
Yeah. Cool. Maybe we can always invite on the newsletter any suggested topics for the next one.
Absolutely.
Will you be using QR codes to take people to the website for more detail?
Yeah, definitely, because we want to get as many stories out there. So yes, we acknowledge the story size is quite small. So yes, always follow where adding in where they can get more information if they want further information.
Okay, Cole, I've looked to my left and I've looked to my right. I can't see any hands in the air. So we've got a recommendation that the committee endorses a one-year trial of the new 4-page ORC newsletter. Notes that the first newsletter will be coming out shortly, June. Notes that the newsletter will be available also digitally. And fourth, request that staff include a new metric in the community survey to monitor the effectiveness of the newsletter. So unless there's any objection, I'll put all those 4 recommendations together. Are people okay about that? Do we have a mover? Alexa, and a seconder, Andrew. I'll put the motion, those 4, aye, against, carried. Thank you. And to our final report, last but not least, update on community survey action points by Vicky. Thank you, Vicky. paper presents a progress report to the ORC Community Survey Action Plan. And it's really interesting if you flick to page 46 of 50, the action plan, it just reminds us all that bi-monthly newsletter, quarterly 12-page performance report, rates brochure, Wanaka AMP show, which is come and gone, build up stakeholder engagement lists, develop ORC brand, as Kevin points out, own newsreel for Facebook, proactively advertise the pollution hotline, the environmental implementation will be partnering with NPI, raise the profile of pest control, natural hazards, resource consents, improve redesign our website, work collaboratively with public transport providers, initiate a video marketing campaign to increase bus patronage, community engagement, youth engagement. I'm interested to know a bit more about that actually, and complete the update of the ORC environmental data portal. So there's a lot of actions. How's it going?
Really good. Like,
cool.
The whole organisation is working really well together, and we're working more closely with other teams, which makes our job easier. In 6 months since we presented the action plan, I think everyone's done a really good job.
Can I just add in here, and Vicky's absolutely right. I suppose just reflecting on the fact that turning around the results in the community survey, and you may remember Natalie discussing this when she was down presenting that, it's not something you can do within 3, 6, 12 months. This is something that needs to be a concerted effort from council over a number of years to change the way we engage and communicate, and that's what's reflected in here with a number of these being in process and ongoing. We'd love to see a whole lot of all completed actions, but the reality is that we will need to keep a focus on a number of these things ongoing to reflect that change in the survey. So the team are working incredibly hard, and it's great the organisation is committed to this action plan as well. But yeah, just noting, I guess, the focus that it would be good for this committee to keep on this space, and so that we don't sort of do it as a priority and then it falls away with other things to go on, because this is something that will need a sustained effort.
Cool. And of course, just our normal business will be judged upon our normal business. And if we're communicating that so people understand how we're going, then we'll be judged, pro rata on that, as per the previous regulatory report. I open it up, Alexa.
Great report, thank you. It's really good to see this work happening, and I'm going with what Richard's saying about it takes time. I'm just thinking about the public transport comms being on hold, and I get your reason why, perfectly valid. We don't want to be promoting stuff and things like that, but what does worry me is the communication of the news that isn't good for people too is really important. And I guess this doesn't fully look at that, but I wonder how we might think about
when
that.
I was writing this report, the public transport team and the comms staff that look after public transport actually have a whole 2-page list of what they're actually doing in the comms space. It is amazing, and they are, with all the challenges that are happening at the moment, they are still communicating around those challenges and making sure people are aware of where the information is to go. So yes, some projects are on hold for us to go out and talk about some things, but definitely we are communicating on those challenges that are happening at the moment and making sure people are aware.
I think, Alexa, that's definitely in the plan, is to continue to do that. It's just that we need to sort of focus on meeting those challenges and dealing with those initially. It's your classic marketing dilemma, isn't it? It's supply and demand. And so we just need to make sure that we've got the supply right, and then we can move up to the next level. But it's looking positive, I think, into the future.
Oh yeah, I think it is too. I just want to make sure that people know when the buses are coming.
Yeah.
Just reflecting in terms of this report itself is the action plan, which is a number of sort of specific projects identified out of the community survey. There is a whole raft of business as usual, which was what I'd talk, I'd class what you're talking about as important business as usual around the communication space that continues to happen.
Yep, good, thank you. I just wanted to make sure it stays there front of mind.
Thanks, Alexa. I've looked to my left and I've looked to, there's Kate. Yeah.
I'm going to ask what is really probably being pedantic, but I just want to check on number 3, reference number 3. You talk about the rates brochure.
Yeah.
and the level of information to ratepayers on the role of the ORC. And I think people are less interested in the role, but the work that it does, and they're different.
I definitely, yeah, so it probably has shape. So we are currently working on that at the moment, and it is definitely more on what the rates money is going towards and the areas. That's more what the brochure is about.
And it would be forward looking rather than
Yes,
what we
definitely
have
what's
done, it's what we-
happening
yeah.
coming in the next 12
Yeah.
months. Yeah, that's definitely the focus.
And so, and when you talk about stakeholder lists, and I see that EIT have passed on the list they have, I mean, one of my frustrations is that we go out to a flood meeting, we get a stakeholder list, and that can only then be used by the Flood Protection Committee. Are we getting a form that quite clearly provides some notice that that list or those stakeholder lists may be used by
Other groups? Yeah, I think there's a bigger piece on engagement going on that should be a result of and implemented.
Yeah, so there's some work, and someone mentioned youth before. There's and that falls into that category. There's engagement. There's some work that Amanda's looking at in the engagement space that will pick up how we maintain and communicate with key stakeholder lists. But what does happen now that everything is running back through the communications team is that they can leverage off the broader list of information they've got in terms of who we're communicating around different events. So we do get greater coverage because it's being managed little centrally, if you like, through the communications team. So it's not necessarily narrowly focused depending on who the team's spoken to in the past. It's who the communications team feels based on the list of contacts they've got maybe interested in that work.
I mean, a frustration I had expressed to me about both of people not hearing about a meeting. They go to regular meetings, but they hadn't heard about that meeting because they weren't on that particular list. And it frustrates, it can, as much as it can frustrate people that they're only interested in buses and they hear about flood works, actually, some people are frustrated because they missed out.
Yeah.
And the last one is, look, it was wonderful to go to the Wanaka show and great presentation of all the issues and the roles and the work that we're doing. Just wondering at what level in here we are engaged with and the notice we get of those opportunities to engage, like the youth one. Don't know that I've been invited to Enviro schools, never invited to a school thing, and whether we've got a role with that. And at what that was lacking clarity. I can understand this is a functional document, this is operational for staff. Those opportunities for us to be involved was less clear. And I think that we are seen as the face of the ORC by some communities.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think all the guidance that I've had from Richard is that you are involved and you should be involved, and we will try to involve you in every opportunity that we know about.
Cool. Like, I would have thought for the youth engagement, we've got one councillor in particular that would fit into that space.
So that's on hold because we don't really do it. So let's be honest, we don't do a lot of it. So I know there's a meeting coming up that Gretchen has arranged Alan's arranged that staff will go to, and again, picking up the work that's happening in the engagement space, there needs to be some thought given by ORC to how we engage with youth. So it's not that you're being excluded from things, it's just that at this stage we don't have a plan for that, and therefore there aren't those regular events occurring. And I think an important part of setting up that engagement plan is asking youth what they want, rather than us setting stuff up and telling them what they want.
Cool. Alan?
I was just going to mention the meeting that Richard's alluded to, which actually came from an approach from, what are they? The Joint Student Council, which is a group of high school students who said, because I had some other contact with them in another role, had said they'd like to have a stronger relationship with the regional council. So we've got that meeting coming up.
Cool.
In a couple of weeks.
That's great.
Just an place to look.
That's great. I think we're getting there. Have no further questions. We've got 4 recommendations and it's 20 to 11, so we've got a 20-minute break to the next meeting. The recommendations are, there's 4 of them there. Notes of the final progress report on the community survey action plan will be reported to council before the end of this calendar year. That's not this meeting, Richard.
Calendar year, so like Christmas.
Okay. Notes that the ORC community survey will be carried out again in 2023 and reported to council before the end of the calendar year. And finally, notes that a new community survey action plan will be put forward for approval based on the results of the next community survey before the end of the calendar year. So it's an exciting time. Keep at it. Thank you. Do we have a move for those? Kevin's moving that, we've got Alexa second, that I can put the motion on those for, aye, against, carried. Thank you. I close today's meeting of the Regional Leadership Committee. Thank you.